1:25 p.m. The flight deck is active but calm. Jets sit secured and quiet, their canopies flashing white beneath the hard midday sun. Deck crews move with practiced precision. Yellow shirts signal, red shirts check safety pins. Green shirts crouch near the catwalks. The wind over the bow is steady, the sea is manageable. Nothing in the air suggests anything unusual. Below deck, inside the Combat Information Center, the radar picture looks routine until suddenly it does not. At 1:25 and 17 seconds, 3 faint returns appear at the far edge of the air surge display. Music. They are not strong, not civilian-looking, but clear enough to register. The radar operator says nothing at first. He leans closer and adjusts the gain. The contacts remain. 3 tracks, high speed, no transponder. CIC to bridge, he says evenly. We have 3 fast-moving air contacts bearing 310, long range. On the bridge, nobody looks shocked. They have heard reports like this before. But tone matters, and this time the tone is different. The officer of the deck steps closer to the console. The track data updates again. Music, speed is climbing, altitude is dropping, music that gets attention. At 1:26 p.m., the 3 contacts tighten formation. This is not casual transit, and it is not coincidence. Their vectors line up with the carrier's projected course. They are not crossing it. They are not skirting past it. They are moving straight in. No identification, no radio call, no explanation. On the flight deck, a green shirt pauses mid-step, sensing the change before hearing it confirmed. Then the air boss cuts across the net, clipped and precise. Stand by, hold positions. Below deck, steel doors begin sealing shut. Not slammed, just secured. The sound travels through the hull like a low mechanical breath. Inside CIC, the picture sharpens. Radar now resolves clearer shapes. Fast. Military. Precise. The tactical action officer watches the timeline shrink. At their current speed, time to closest approach is now measured in minutes. Bridge, CIC reports. Contacts accelerating. No IFF response. The captain is already there. He does not raise his voice. He does not need to. Set condition 3, he says. No explanation follows. None is necessary. Across the ship, the words spread quickly. Condition 3. Key stations manned. Systems ready. Sensors prioritized. Logs rolling. This is the line between routine and serious. At 1:27 p.m., the contacts descend again, now low enough that their approach is no longer abstract. Their altitude puts them in the range where intent starts to matter. Deck cameras automatically tilt skyward, feeding live imagery back to CIC. Blue sky, broken cloud, nothing visible yet, but radar does not lie. One of the 3 aircraft shifts position, sliding slightly ahead of the others and offsetting to the right. A probing move. Testing response time, testing nerves. The ship does not alter course. The ship does not change speed. At 1:28 p.m., the first radio hail goes out over guard frequency. Standard, professional. Unidentified aircraft approaching U.S. Navy warship. You are operating near a naval vessel in international airspace. State your intentions. Silence. No tone. No acknowledgement. Only the steady hiss of an open frequency. On deck, a jet blast deflector begins to rise. Not all the way, just enough to be ready. Crew members clear the area with smooth, practiced movement. No running, no panic. Inside CIC, passive sensors begin logging emissions. Listening only, not transmitting. The contacts continue inbound. At 1:29 p.m., their speed peaks. The lead aircraft drops even lower, settling into a profile that will be unmistakable the moment it becomes visual. Range is collapsing. CIC calls 3 contacts tight formation. The captain watches the display without expression. This is not open conflict, not yet, but it is no longer routine. Everything about the approach signals intent without commitment, pressure without escalation. A move designed to force a reaction. The ship gives none. At 1:30 p.m., the contacts are close enough that deck crews feel the shift in air before they see anything. A subtle vibration, a change in the wind. Still no active targeting indications, only speed and purpose. The captain breaks the silence. Log everything. In CIC, timestamps continue to roll. Bearing, speed, altitude, every second recorded. Whatever this becomes next, it is no longer unseen. The test has started. There are still no heavy signatures, just speed, presence, and intent. 1:32 p.m. The air picture tightens further. Passive sensors finish separating signal from noise, and the uncertainty disappears. The contacts now resolve into military aircraft, fast movers whose signatures clearly do not match civilian traffic. The classification comes back clean. Russian aircraft, 3 military jets. They are flying disciplined spacing, no transponders, no cooperative identification. They are not lost, they are not drifting. They are exactly where they mean to be. Inside CIC, the tactical action officer acknowledges the update with a short nod. The information moves to the bridge without commentary. The captain already understands what it means. At 1:33 p.m., the formation shifts. The lead aircraft drops lower, peeling slightly off axis and angling toward the carrier's bow. The other two hang back, wide enough to observe, close enough to support. This is not a simple pass. It is a setup. Bridge CIC. Contacts now identified as Russian military aircraft. Altitude decreasing. Lead contact maneuvering aggressively. On the flight deck, personnel clear the most exposed positions. Not because anyone is panicking, but because they understand the geometry. Low, fast aircraft change the margin for error. A second radio hail goes out, crisp and formal. Russian military aircraft, this is a United States Navy warship operating in international airspace. Maintain safe distance. The frequency remains open. No response. At 1:34 p.m., the lead aircraft commits. It drops below 500 feet, nose lowered just enough to build speed, then lines up directly across the carrier's projected path. On deck, heads tilt upward. Sunglasses catch the glare. Someone mutters under his breath, then falls silent. The jet tears past the bow at low altitude, crossing the ship's axis with deliberate precision. Close enough to feel, close enough to remove all doubt. The sound hits a heartbeat later, raw engine thunder ripping across steel and water. Loose gear rattles, wind lashes across the deck in a sudden violent gust. Inside CIC, no one flinches. The radar trace spikes, then steadies. The aircraft climbs away and banks hard to rejoin the others. This is the moment they had been waiting for. System status remains unchanged. No fire control indication, no immediate escalation. But something else lights up on the board. ESM confirms track mode, the electronic warfare officer reports. Not a lock, but they're painting us. That matters. Track mode means measurement, observation, pressure. It means they want to see how the ship responds under stress. At 1:36 p.m., the second aircraft slides forward, mirroring the first pass but staying higher and wider. A different angle, a different look. The carrier does not turn. The carrier does not accelerate. The bridge remains quiet. The captain stands with his hands folded behind his back, watching the feed. This is not about bravado, it is about control. The ship's response, or refusal to give one, is already part of the exchange. Down in CIC, the timeline tightens again. The Russians are not finished. At 1:37 p.m., the third aircraft moves. It descends just enough to make itself clearly visible, then holds steady. No dramatic pass, no theatrics. Just presence. Music. 3 aircraft now bracket the carrier's surrounding airspace, not crossing the line, but pressing hard against it. It is a textbook pressure maneuver, close enough to provoke, careful enough to deny. Range steady, CIC reports. No visible armament activity. Another hail goes out. Same words, same tone, same silence in return. The deck crew watches the sky, then looks away. They have done this long enough to know when watching changes nothing. What matters now is below deck, in the sensors, the logs, the discipline, the restraint. At 1:38 p.m., the lead aircraft climbs sharply, then pulls back power just enough to stretch the moment. It wants a reaction, a launch, a scramble. Anything that can be pointed to later. It gets nothing. Instead, the ship records everything. Every burst of radar energy, every altitude change, every frequency hop. And the closer the aircraft come, the more clearly their signatures reveal themselves. Their speed profiles, their emissions, their patterns, their habits. The provocation is loud. The response is silence. At 1:39 p.m., the formation loosens. Not retreating, repositioning. The aircraft widen their spacing and arc back into a broader pattern. They have made their point. They tested the line, and the line held. The captain speaks again, his voice low and even. Maintain course, maintain posture. The bridge acknowledges. Inside CIC, operators continue logging. The encounter is not over, but its shape is changing. This was never about immediate escalation. It was about discovering how far they could push without crossing the threshold and what they would get back in return. What they got was discipline and time. The sky is still contested, but the balance has shifted. At 1:40 p.m., the lead aircraft sweeps across the carrier's forward quarter again. Not as low this time, but still fast enough to shake the air. A pressure wave rolls across the deck. Loose straps snap tight. On the bridge, no one reacts. Below, the ship responds flawlessly. Radar returns are cross-checked against passive detections. Timing between emissions is logged down to the second. Patterns begin to emerge: how quickly the aircraft respond to proximity, how often they change altitude, how they space themselves when no one challenges them. This is not guesswork. Music. This is cataloging. At 1:41 p.m., the Russian aircraft tighten their circle. Not directly overhead, just far enough out to observe, yet close enough to remain inside the ship's awareness zone. They are measuring reactions. What they do not realize is that they are being measured as well. Bridge CIC, comes the report. Continuing passive collection. No change in weapons posture. The captain gives a single nod. The bridge stays quiet. The ship's restraint is intentional. Music, active radar would reveal itself. A launch would raise the stakes. Silence keeps the advantage exactly where it is. Music. At 1:42 p.m., one aircraft briefly changes modes. Search to track, then back again. A tiny flicker, almost invisible, but not to this ship. Track mode spike logged, the electronic warfare officer says. Short duration. That brief moment becomes another data point, another signature, another fingerprint. At this distance, very little stays hidden. The Russian pilots likely believe they control the moment. They have closed the distance, drawn attention, and visually dominated the airspace. What they have not managed to force is a reaction. And without that reaction, the exchange remains on American terms. At 1:43 p.m., the formation stretches. One aircraft drifts wider, acting as overwatch. The other two maintain pressure from separate angles. It is coordinated, practiced. That makes the data even more valuable. Every coordinated movement reveals something. Doctrine, training habits, leadership patterns. Who leads, who follows, how quickly they adapt when nothing happens. Inside CIC, analysts mark the timeline. No panic. No surprises. At 1:44 p.m., the ship's passive systems are saturated. Not overloaded, just full. The picture is rich now. Clean, coherent. The Russians have shown their hand without realizing it. Their radar behavior, their thermal profile, their spacing under pressure. All of it is being logged, stored, and sent through secure channels far beyond the horizon. This is the trap. Not steel, not missiles. Information. The captain speaks quietly to the officer of the deck. Continue logging. No change. Aye, sir. Above the deck, the aircraft keeps circling. Still close. Still loud. Still confident. They believe the carrier is simply waiting them out. In reality, the carrier already has what it came for. At 1:45 p.m., the first subtle signs appear. A slight widening of distance, a gradual climb. Nothing dramatic, just enough to suggest the pressure phase is ending. The Russians have tested the boundary. They have made their point. What they do not know is that the exchange is no longer about presence. It is about what they left behind. And they left behind everything. Music at 1:46 p.m. The third aircraft slips slightly out of plane with the others. Not a retreat, more like reassessment. Its nose turns just a few degrees off the carrier's axis. That is the tell. They have finished measuring. Now they are checking the result. The ship does nothing. No turn, no change in speed, no launch. The deck remains calm, almost indifferent. The message is clear without being spoken. You did not move us. Inside CIC, the timeline is already being assembled. Each maneuver tied to its timestamp. Each emission aligned with corresponding behavior. Analysts do not speculate. They compare. Passive collection complete, the electronic warfare officer says quietly. Pattern consistent. At 1:47 p.m., one of the Russian aircraft climbs again, this time cleanly and with purpose, pulling away from the low-altitude intimidation profile. The roar softens. The air settles. The flight deck crew notice it immediately, not because they relax, but because the tension changes. The kind of shift that tells you the moment is passing. Still, no one says much. One final radio hail goes out from the bridge, same wording, same calm tone. Russian military aircraft, you are approaching unsafe distance to a U.S. Navy warship. Recommend increasing separation. This time, there is no dramatic silence. There is nothing at all. At 1:48 p.m., the formation begins to withdraw. Not quickly, not urgently, just enough to create distance where there had been none. The aircraft roll wings level, widen their spacing, and climb as they go. Inside CIC, range begins to increase. Contact's opening distance, the radar operator confirms. The captain exhales slowly, barely noticeable. This is the moment that matters. No confrontation, no escalation, just resolution. At 1:49 p.m., the airspace around the carrier opens again. The Russian aircraft remain visible on sensors, but the geometry is no longer aggressive. The pressure vector has collapsed. They made their pass. They got their look. Now they are leaving. The bridge remains silent until the captain finally speaks. Maintain course. Maintain condition 3. The officer of the deck acknowledges. The ship remains exactly what it has been throughout. Composed, controlled, unshaken. Below decks, the logs continue. Data streams are packaged and encrypted. What was gathered over the last 20 minutes is already moving beyond the ship, flowing through secure networks to places that do not need spectacle to understand its value. At 1:50 p.m., the Russian aircraft turn farther away, their noses pointed outward now, climbing steadily. The sound fades with distance. On the flight deck, a few crew members glance upward one last time, then return to work. Jets remain chained. Operations resume. No announcement is made. There is nothing to announce. The encounter never crossed into open conflict. No weapons were activated, no fighters launched, no alarms sounded beyond what was necessary. And yet the balance has shifted. What began as a test of nerve ends as a quiet confirmation of control. The Russians came close enough to be seen, close enough to be felt, close enough to be measured. And in doing so, they revealed more than they gained. At 1:52 p.m., CIC confirms it. Contacts now on outbound vectors. No further approach expected. The captain nods once. That'll do. The ship continues on its original heading, cutting cleanly through open water, unchanged by the encounter that just unfolded around it. To a distant observer, it might appear that nothing happened. No footage released, no public statement, no dramatic maneuver to replay. But inside the ship, everyone understands the truth. This was never about winning a confrontation. It was about proving that the confrontation was never theirs to control. And in that contest, the outcome is already clear. At 1:55 p.m., the last audible trace of the aircraft disappears. The wind returns to normal. The sea looks exactly as it did before. If you were not watching closely, you might miss that anything happened at all. That is the point. There will be no press release, no public footage, no statements delivered to cameras. The ship does not need them. In modern naval operations, silence can be the strongest message of all. The Russian aircraft tested proximity. They tested reaction time. They tested composure. What they met was discipline. The carrier never maneuvered, never accelerated, never signaled uncertainty. It held its line, not out of bravado, but because it had nothing to prove. Everything that mattered was already being recorded. At 1:58 p.m., the Combat Information Center finalizes the engagement log. The timeline is complete, from first contact to final separation. Every second accounted for. Event logged, CIC reports. The bridge acknowledges. The ship continues on its original course, steady and predictable, cutting through open water with the same posture it held before the first radar return appeared. Nothing about its mission has changed. But something else has. The exchange may never make headlines, but it will remain in databases, training briefs, and future assessments. The next time these aircraft approach another ship somewhere else, someone will remember what was learned here. That is how this works. Not through confrontation, through memory. At 2:01 p.m., Condition 3 is eased. Stations stand down in sequence. Not rushed, not relaxed, just complete. The carrier settles fully back into routine operations, its massive systems humming beneath layers of steel and procedure. Above, the sky is empty again. Below, the record remains. The encounter did not end with force. It ended with understanding. One side unaware of how much it had revealed, the other fully aware of how much it had gained. And that understanding will travel far beyond this stretch of ocean. Because in modern naval power, victory is not always measured by what you destroy. Sometimes it is measured by what you allow to leave.